drink? Or maybe a slogan for a car you'd never buy gets stuck in your head. You might think that's just random, right? A weird brain glitch. But what if I told you it's not an accident at all? It's actually by design.
You see, at the very heart of all of this is a simple psychological concept: learning. Now, officially, it's just a relatively permanent change in our behavior that's caused by experience. But here's the kicker. That experience doesn't even have to be yours. We can learn just by watching what other people do. And that is exactly how brands start to build a space in your head way before you ever even think about reaching for your wallet.
All right, so first up, let's talk about the ways our brain learns things automatically, kind of without us even noticing it's happening. This is your brain running on autopilot. When it comes to this kind of behavioral learning, it pretty much boils down to two big ideas. On one hand, you have classical conditioning. This is all about learning through association. It's that automatic, gut-level stuff we don't control. And on the other hand, you have operant conditioning. This is where we learn from the consequences of our actions, and our deliberate choices get shaped by either rewards or punishments. Let's break them down. Let's start with a classic. And I mean that literally. Pavlov's dogs. There's a reason everyone knows this experiment. So, step 1. You've got meat powder. The dogs drool. Super simple, totally natural, unlearned response. But then, step 2. Pavlov starts ringing a bell right before he brings out the meat. He does this over and over. And then, step 3. Pretty soon, all he has to do is ring the bell, and the dogs start drooling. They have learned to connect that sound with the reward. So what in the world does a drooling dog have to do with your shopping habits? Well, think about your credit card. For many of us, it's become a modern-day Pavlov's bell. We've associated it so strongly with the act of buying, with that little thrill of getting something new, that just pulling it out of our wallet can trigger us to spend more. It's a conditioned cue for consumption. Okay, now let's flip to the other side of the coin, operant conditioning, where we learn from what happens after we do something. Positive reinforcement is easy. You do something, something good happens, so you do it again. You try a new perfume, you get a bunch of compliments, you're definitely going to buy it again. But here's where it gets interesting: negative reinforcement. Now, don't get this confused with punishment. It's not about being punished, it's about avoiding a bad result. Like you buy a sturdier pair of shoes specifically to avoid the embarrassment of having them fall apart on you. In both cases, the result is the same. The brand gets a repeat customer. But hold on. We're not just passive creatures, just reacting to bells and rewards. No way. The next theory sees us as something much more complex and active, as problem solvers. And this is where cognitive learning theory totally changes the game. It basically puts our brain back in the driver's seat. This view says that we're not just being passively conditioned. Nope, we are actively observing, taking in information, thinking, and using all of it to solve problems and navigate the world. This is the kind of learning that involves creativity and those aha moments. A huge piece of this puzzle is learning by watching other people, what psychologists call modeling. And for this to actually work, 4 things have to happen, in order. First, your attention has to be on a model, let's say a friend. Second, you have to retain the information. You have to remember what they did, like what perfume they wore. Third, you've got to be able to produce that same action. You can actually go out and buy that perfume. And finally, and this is crucial, you need the motivation. You want the same reward they got, like getting all those compliments. Now, all this learning we've been talking about, whether it's automatic or through active problem solving, it's completely useless if we don't remember any of it. So let's get into how brands try to hack their way into our memory.
Honestly, the easiest way to think about memory is to picture it like a computer. It's a 3-step process. First, there's encoding, which is like typing the information into the system. Then comes storage, where that data gets warehoused and saved to the hard drive. And finally, you have retrieval, when you need to open that file and access the information. For any ad or jingle to work, it has to successfully make it through all 3 of those stages.
The whole process kicks off with sensory memory. This is like a super short-term, temporary holding area for all the information hitting our senses. Imagine you're walking down the street and you pass a pastry shop. That incredible smell hits you. That's sensory memory. But the sensation itself, it only lasts for a couple of seconds, just long enough for your brain to go,
Is this important?
Now, if your brain decides, yeah, that's important, that info gets bumped up to short-term memory. Think of this as your brain's active desktop or its working memory. The problem is, it's pretty small. It can't hold a lot. So to cope, our brains use this brilliant little trick called chunking. And you know what the ultimate chunk is for a marketer? A brand name. It's just one little word, but it can represent a huge bundle of information, feelings, and experiences. But for information to really, truly stick around, it has to make the leap into long-term memory, the permanent warehouse. And the key to making that happen is something called elaborate rehearsal. And right there, that brings us all the way back to the question we started with. Those catchy slogans and jingles that get stuck in your head, they're not just annoying. They're a deliberate marketing strategy to get you to do the rehearsal for them, over and over until their message is burned into your permanent memory. So, we've looked at how we learn and how our memory works. Now, for our final section, let's pull it all together. Let's open up the marketer's playbook and see exactly how they put all this psychology into practice.
So if creating a totally new brand memory is so difficult and expensive, what do marketers do? Well, they take a shortcut, a big one. And this number 80% shows you just how common it is. About 80% of all so-called new products that hit the shelves aren't new at all. They're actually just extensions of brands you already know and trust. They're piggybacking on the learning you've already done.
And all of these tactics, they really hinge on one powerful psychological idea: stimulus generalization. It's a fancy term, but it just means our brains tend to take the good feelings we have about one thing and apply them to other similar things. So brands use this with family branding, right? Putting a trusted name on a whole range of products. They do it with product line extensions, adding related items. They do it with licensing, basically renting a famous character's good reputation. And they even do it with look-alike packaging, making their product look like the market leader to borrow some of that brand's credibility.
So what this all means is that your buying habits are rarely just a series of random preferences. As we've seen, they're often the result of very specific, very carefully designed learning processes that have been going on your whole life. So now that you've had a peek at the playbook, the only real question left is, how will this change the way you walk down that next shopping aisle?